He kissed her on the cheek at the altar, and 2 hours later she found him in the hallway, with his phone pressed to his ear and his hand on another woman's waist. Not a stranger's waist, Blair Redmond's. The woman Travis had promised Claire 3 separate times was completely out of his life. Claire stood in her second-hand wedding dress, with her bouquet still in her hand, and watched her husband of 47 minutes whisper something into the phone that made Blair laugh on the other end. She could hear it through the speaker, that specific laugh, high and knowing and completely unbothered, the laugh of a woman who had never once worried about rent. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there in the hallway outside the reception hall while bass from the DJ speaker vibrated through the wall, and she waited for Travis to turn around and see her. It took him almost a full minute. When he did, his face did the thing faces do when the body understands the situation, before the brain does a quick collapse, then reconstruction into something that was supposed to look like innocence. He said her name. Claire said nothing. She turned around and walked straight back into the reception, set her bouquet down on the gift table next to an envelope someone had taped a small bow to, picked up her purse from underneath her chair, and walked out the side door into the October cold. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving her own wedding. Nobody noticed until it was too late. If you've ever walked away from something that was supposed to save you, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what happens to Claire will stay with you for a long time. And if this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Hit the like button and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Claire Hensley had been working doubles at Fenwick's Diner since she was 19 years old. 4 years of split shifts, aching feet, and learning to smile at people who never looked at her face. She knew how to read a room. She knew when someone was lying to a table about having a reservation, when a couple was fighting underneath their polite voices, when a man was about to skip out on a bill. She was good at reading people, which made what happened on her wedding day harder to absorb, not easier. Because she had read Travis Keaton, she had read him carefully. She had looked for the cracks and the inconsistencies and the small behavioral tells that she had spent years learning to identify, and she had found a man who seemed genuinely to be trying. That was the part that was going to take a long time to recover from. Not the betrayal itself, betrayal she understood. Her father had walked out when she was 11. Her first serious boyfriend had cheated and then tried to convince her that her reaction was the actual problem. Claire had absorbed her share of human disappointment. She knew what it looked like, and she knew how to survive it. What she hadn't prepared for was being wrong about someone, after she'd worked so hard to make sure she wasn't. The October air hit her the moment she pushed through the side exit, cold and wet and smelling like exhaust from the parking lot. She hadn't grabbed her coat. She was standing in the parking lot of the Millbrook Community Center in a white dress that had cost her $140 at a consignment shop, wearing shoes she'd borrowed from her coworker Dana, and she was trying very hard not to fall apart in a parking lot. She made it about 30 seconds before she sat down on a concrete parking barrier and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. Her throat closed up and her eyes stung, but nothing came out. There was a pressure behind her sternum that felt physical, like something had been installed in her chest that was 2 sizes too big. Inside the community center, the DJ was playing something with a lot of synth in it. Someone whooped. The bass traveled through the concrete beneath her and up through her shoes and into her feet. Her weddingception was continuing without her. She heard the side door open behind her. She assumed it was her mother, or Dana, or someone who had finally noticed the bride was gone. It wasn't. The man who came through the door was tall, not in a way that was immediately obvious, but in the way where you suddenly became aware that you were looking up. He was wearing a dark suit that had not come off a rack anywhere in the Boston metropolitan area, and he had the particular quality of stillness that very few people actually possess naturally. The kind where you couldn't tell whether he was relaxed or simply extremely practiced at appearing that way. He was followed at a distance by 2 men who stopped near the door and stood without speaking. The tall man looked at Claire for a moment. Then he removed his jacket and held it out. Claire stared at it. "I'm fine. You're sitting on concrete in October in a wedding dress, he said. You're not fine. His voice was low and even, and it didn't carry any of the performance that most men put into speaking to a woman in distress. No particular softness, no manufactured warmth, just a statement of what was observable. Claire took the jacket. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because arguing felt like more effort than she had left. The jacket was warm in the way that expensive things are warm, lined with something that trapped heat and smelled like cedar and something else she couldn't identify. She pulled it around her shoulders and looked at the man who had given it to her. "Were you at the wedding?" she asked. "I was at the venue for other reasons." She accepted that, without asking what the other reasons were. She didn't have the bandwidth. "He was on the phone with another woman," Claire said. "On our wedding day. During our reception." She wasn't sure why she was saying it out loud to a stranger. Maybe because saying it out loud was the only way to make herself believe it had actually happened. "He promised me she was done. 3 times. 3 separate times I asked him and he promised." The man said nothing for a moment. Then Travis Keaton. Claire went very still. "You know him." "I know who he is," the man said. The distinction was precise and deliberate. Before she could process what that meant, the side door exploded open again, and Travis came through it. His tie was loose. His face had the particular redness that meant he'd been drinking steadily and was now operating on adrenaline and damage control. He crossed the parking lot in a few strides and grabbed her arm above the elbow. His grip was harder than it needed to be. "Claire, stop. You're being dramatic. Come back inside." "Let go of my arm." "People are in there waiting." I said, "Let go." Travis's jaw tightened. "You're embarrassing both of us. If you'd just come back inside, we can talk about this, like adults and—" "She asked you to let go." The voice was quiet, not raised, not aggressive. Travis turned. Whatever he saw in the tall man's face made him release Claire's arm immediately. She watched Travis's expression change through several rapid iterations: confusion, recognition, something that looked very much like fear before he settled on a kind of forced neutrality that didn't fully stabilize. "Whitmore," Travis said. The tall man said nothing. Travis took a visible breath. "This is a private matter between me and my wife." "That's not what she said." A pause stretched between the two men. Travis was not a small person. He was broad-shouldered and had played lacrosse in college and retained the physical confidence that came from that. But he receded in the presence of this man, the way a lit match recedes near an open window. "Claire," Travis said her name again, but the grab-her-arm energy was completely gone. "Please." Claire looked at Travis Keaton for what she did not yet know would be the last time she looked at him without something hard in her chest. "Don't contact me," she said. "Go finish your reception." She turned away from him. Travis stood there for another few seconds. Then he went back inside. The side door swung shut. Claire let out a long breath and looked at the jacket still around her shoulders. Then she looked at the man named Whitmore. "Thank you," she said. "You need somewhere to go." "I have an apartment." A pause. "I share it with my mother. She's in there." She gestured vaguely at the community center. "Is it somewhere Travis doesn't have a key to?" The question landed with more precision than she was ready for. She thought about the key rack by her front door, where Travis's spare key had been hanging for 3 months. She'd given it to him herself. "He has a key," she said. The man Whitmore turned and said something to one of the men near the door. The man immediately moved, disappearing around the side of the building. "My name is Callan Whitmore," he said. Claire didn't say her name. She had a feeling he already knew it. He walked to a black SUV parked near the rear of the lot and opened the back door. He did it without ceremony, without a speech, without any of the elaborate gesture-making that people perform when they're trying to convince you of something. Claire stood in the cold with his jacket on her shoulders and looked at the open door. She thought about going back inside. She thought about finding her mother and Dana and sitting through the rest of a reception that belonged to a marriage she no longer believed in. She thought about sleeping in her apartment with Travis's key on the rack by the front door, wondering whether he'd come back tonight angry or apologetic or both. She walked to the SUV and got in. The drive was quiet. Callan sat beside her and said nothing for several minutes, and she found that she didn't need him to fill the silence. The two security men were in the front. Boston moved past the windows, streetlights, and wet pavement, and the particular loneliness of a city at night that doesn't know or care what's happened to you. Then Callan spoke. How much do you know about Travis's finances? Claire looked at him. I know he was between jobs when we met, she said carefully. He said he had investments. He seemed like he was doing fine. He never asked me for money. He borrowed $190,000 from a man named Gideon Redmond, Callan said. Blair Redmond is Gideon's daughter. Travis was already involved with Blair when he started seeing you. The bass from the community center had completely faded. There was only the sound of the engine and rain beginning to hit the windshield. Why would she started? Because Gideon Redmond agreed to extend his debt repayment timeline on one condition: that Travis stabilize his image and his life, show proof of financial responsibility. Marriage to a credible, employed woman with a clean background was part of what he was building toward. The pressure in Claire's chest changed character. It had been grief before. Now it was becoming something else. He married me for optics. Callan didn't soften it. That's what the evidence suggests. She sat with that for a very long time. And you know this because Travis approached my organization 3 weeks ago requesting an additional loan, Callan said. I don't extend credit to people I haven't investigated. He said it completely plainly. My organization. Like it was ordinary. Like he was telling her he worked in acquisitions. What kind of organization? Claire said, though she was already constructing the answer from the pieces she had. The quality of the suit, the silent men, the way Travis had backed down the moment Callan appeared. The kind Travis should have been more careful about approaching, Callan said. A pause. And you decided to help me because I didn't decide in advance, he said. I saw what happened. She looked at him. He was looking out the rain-blurred window at something she couldn't see. I've watched people be used as instruments before, he said. I have strong feelings about it. She didn't ask him to elaborate. She was starting to understand that Whitmore said exactly he intended to say, and nothing additional, and that this was not rudeness, it was a specific, practiced economy of language that cost something she couldn't yet name. The SUV stopped. They were at a hotel on the waterfront, glass and steel, and the kind of underlit lobby that communicates a price range without displaying one. The kind of place Claire walked past, not into. Callan got out and waited. I'm not taking your money, Claire said through the open door. I'm not offering you money, he said. I'm offering you a room that Travis cannot access until you've had time to think. She looked at him. And what do you want from me for it? She asked. Because she had learned, the hard way, that people who offer you things always want something. Callan held the door and looked at her with an expression that she couldn't read at all. Nothing, he said. She didn't believe him immediately. She was too old and had worked too many double shifts and absorbed too many small human betrayals to believe anyone who told her with a straight face that they wanted nothing in return. But she got out of the SUV anyway, because she had nowhere else to go that felt safe. And because in the parking lot of the Millbrook Community Center, in the freezing dark, with Travis's hand still leaving a red mark on her arm, Callan Whitmore had done the thing that almost no one in Claire's life had ever done. He'd asked her to let go, and he hadn't made her feel like letting go made her weak. The hotel room was enormous and quiet and overlooked the harbor. Someone had arranged for a change of clothes to appear practical things, her size, still tagged. A robe, slippers, a tray with food she didn't ask for, and a note that said only, "Eat something." She ate. She sat on the bed in the robe and called her mother. The conversation was one of the hardest she'd ever had. Not because her mother was cruel. Her mother, Diane, was a woman who communicated mostly through practical concern, like offering to make tea at inopportune moments and asking whether you'd eaten, but because her mother had tried very gently to express doubts about Travis twice in the past year, and Claire had refused to hear them. I'm fine, Claire told her. You are not fine, Diane said. Same words as Callan. Different texture. I know I'm not fine right now. I will be fine. Where are you? Somewhere safe. A pause. With who? Someone who helped me, Claire said. Mom, I promise I'll explain everything. I just can't tonight. Diane went quiet for a moment. Then she said what she always said when she ran out of better options, "I'll leave the light on." Claire hung up and sat in the quiet. The harbor lights moved on the water outside. Somewhere below, Boston carried on entirely unaware that a 23-year-old waitress was sitting in a hotel room trying to reassemble her understanding of the last 8 months of her life. Travis had seen her, evaluated her, decided she was usable. And she had looked at him and seen a man who was trying. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the harbor and made herself sit with the full weight of it without flinching away. She was not going to cry about Travis Keaton. She was not going to spend whatever energy she had left on anger at herself for being wrong. She was going to figure out what came next. That was what she'd always done. 3 days passed in the hotel. Callan arranged for a lawyer to begin the annulment paperwork. He did not visit the room. He sent the housekeeper, a small older woman named Mabel Prescott, who delivered food with the authority of someone who had been feeding people against their will for 40 years, and once, a brief text message, "Anything you need, use the room service." On the evening of the third day, Claire was restless in the way that hotel rooms make you restless when you've been in them too long. The walls were beautiful, and the bed was enormous, and there was nothing to do that felt like living. She went downstairs to the hotel bar. She ordered a club soda because she wasn't in the mood to drink, and she sat at the end of the bar and watched the room, which was what she always did in bars' occupational habit. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes when the man sat down beside her. He was a few years older, blonde, with the particular bought case of expensive casual, that money clothes that looked effortless because they'd been chosen with great effort. He was good-looking in a symmetrical way, the kind of looks that were immediately readable as a form of leverage. He flagged the bartender and then turned to look at her with a familiarity that hadn't been earned. "You're staying here," he said. "Not a question." "I don't know you," Claire said. "Sterling Redmond," he said. "My family owns property near here." "I've seen you in the lobby," he smiled. It was the smile of someone who had found that smiling worked often enough to keep doing it. "I'm not interested in conversation," Claire said. Harsh. He reached for his drink. "My sister knows your husband, I think." Claire went still. Sterling smiled again, and this one had a different quality, probing, interested in her reaction. "Former husband, I guess, from what I've heard. Messy situation." "You should leave me alone," Claire said. "I'm curious about you," he said. "An ordinary girl in a hotel like this. Someone's keeping you here." He tilted his head. "I'd like to know who finds you that interesting." His hand came down on her wrist. Not hard, just certain. The kind of grip that was meant to communicate. "You're not leaving until I say." Claire looked down at his hand, then she looked up at him. "Take your hand off me," she said. "In a minute, remove your hand from her wrist." Sterling released her immediately. She looked up. Callan was standing 6 feet away. He had not materialized from anywhere dramatic, he had simply been there. Suddenly, the way certain people manage to exist in spaces, without occupying them in the conventional sense, until the moment they choose to. He looked at Sterling Redmond the way you look at something that has made an error and doesn't yet know it. "Whitmore," Sterling said. He recovered fast. The Redmond composure was apparently a family trait, but the recovery cost him something. "I didn't realize she was yours." "She's not mine," Callan said. "She doesn't belong to anyone, but she is under my protection, and you just put your hand on her." A pause that lasted exactly the right amount of time. "This location, and every property I control in this city, is closed to you as of tonight. Permanently." Sterling stared at him. "You're serious," Sterling said. "I'm always serious," Callan said. Sterling stood. He straightened his jacket with the particular deliberateness of someone managing the appearance of not being rattled. Then he walked out. Callan watched him leave. Then he looked at Claire. "The hotel isn't safe anymore," he said. "He'll tell his father you're here. And that's a problem because Gideon Redmond may decide you're useful leverage to get to Travis." He paused. "Or to me," she looked at him. "Where then?" she said. "My estate," he said. "Outside the city. The security there is mine and it doesn't have gaps." She picked up her club soda and finished it. "Okay," she said. She said it. The way someone says a word when they've already spent all their available resistance on the month that came before, and there is simply nothing left to push back with. Not surrender, just exhaustion meeting practicality. Callan waited while she went upstairs to collect her things. He didn't offer to help carry them. She appreciated that. She had 2 bags, the change of clothes Mabel had brought, plus what she'd managed to collect from her apartment during a quick, guarded trip the previous morning. In the SUV, Callan said, "Mabel will be at the estate. She's been with the household since before I took over." "You can trust her." "Took over," Claire repeated. "My father ran the organization until 9 years ago," Callan said. "What happened 9 years ago?" A pause. "He died," Callan said. She looked at his profile in the dark of the vehicle. "Did you—" She stopped. "No," Callan said. She believed him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because he'd had every opportunity to lie to her and hadn't taken any of them yet. "I'm sorry," she said, "that your father died." Callan looked at the road ahead. "Don't be," he said. And something in the way he said it told her that this was a story considerably longer than 2 words, and that she'd be there long enough to eventually hear it. And that was the first moment sitting in the back of a black SUV outside Boston on a wet October night. Claire Hensley understood she wasn't just passing through Callan Whitmore's life. She was in it, for now at least, whether she'd chosen it or not. The estate materialized out of darkness, and tree-lined lit windows and a gravel drive, and the sound of security systems she couldn't see. It was not a comfortable place yet. It was large and well-organized and quiet, in the way that places are quiet when they've been quiet for too long. Mabel Prescott met them at the door. She was a small, wide woman in her late 60s with short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who had seen everything and was entirely capable of handling it. She looked at Claire. She looked at Callan. Then she looked back at Claire and said, "You've had a week." "Yeah," Claire said. "Kitchen's warm," Mabel said. "Come eat something real." She turned and walked down the hall without waiting to see if they'd follow. Callan looked at Claire. "She's not wrong," he said. They followed Mabel to the kitchen. And for the first time since she'd walked out of her own wedding reception, Claire Hensley sat at a table with food in front of her and people around her and no immediate disaster requiring her attention. She picked up a fork. Outside, the October wind moved through the Massachusetts dark. She ate. Mabel Prescott had a system for everything. Breakfast appeared at 7:30, regardless of whether anyone asked for it. Coffee was made strong enough that the smell alone functioned as an alarm clock. The kitchen was kept at a temperature that Mabel described as comfortable, and everyone else as slightly too warm, and she showed no interest in adjusting it. Claire discovered all of this on her first full morning at the estate. She came downstairs at 7:15, moving quietly because the house was still and she wasn't sure of its rhythms yet, and found Mabel already at the stove with her reading glasses pushed up and a dish towel over one shoulder and the radio playing low something with piano, not loud enough to identify. Mabel didn't look up. "Eggs or oatmeal, either is fine." "That's not an answer." "Eggs," Claire said. "Sit down." Claire sat. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. It was also the most human room, worn at the edges in ways the rest of the estate wasn't. With a ceramic mug collection on the open shelf that didn't match, and a small window over the sink that looked out onto a side garden that had gone dormant for the season. Everything else in the house was deliberate and controlled. The kitchen felt like it had been lived in by accident. Mabel set eggs and toast in front of Claire and sat down across from her with her own coffee and looked at her directly with the candid assessment of someone who had no patience for preamble. "You're not what I expected," Mabel said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know." She made a gesture with her coffee mug that encompassed some qualities she didn't have a word for. "Callan doesn't bring people here. He told me it was a security decision." "It was," Mabel said. "That doesn't mean it's something he does." Claire ate her eggs. They were good, not fancy, just properly made, the way eggs rarely were when someone cooked them for you. "How long have you worked for him?" Claire asked. "I worked for his father first," Mabel said. 22 years ago this February, Callan was 11. A pause. His mother had already been gone 3 years by then. Claire waited. Mabel's expression didn't change exactly, but something in it settled into a more careful arrangement. "I don't discuss the family history unprompted, but I'll tell you one thing, because I think you'll need it." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Callan has not trusted anyone in this house in 9 years. Not one person. He trusts me because I've been here long enough that trust became irrelevant. I'm part of the structure. A pause. You're not part of the structure. He brought you here anyway. He brought me here because it's secure, Claire said. There are 12 other properties he controls that are equally secure, Mabel said. Eat your toast. Claire ate her toast. A sound Sina. She thought about what Mabel had said for the rest of the morning, while she walked through the first floor of the house, trying to understand its geography, the formal rooms that clearly weren't used as formal rooms, the study with the door left half open, the back hallway that led to a sunroom facing the garden where someone left a folded newspaper on a chair. She thought about it the way you think about something you're not ready to directly examine, circling it, noting it, filing it. She was not going to read anything into Callan Whitmore's choices. She was going to focus on her annulment, on her mother, on the logistics of her actual life, which needed considerable reorganization. She had a job to go back to. Fenwick's had been understanding. Her manager had told her to take whatever time she needed, which probably meant a week before they started filling her shifts. She had a lease she shared with her mother that needed addressing. She had a marriage to legally dissolve. She had absolutely no business thinking about why Callan had picked this specific estate out of 12 possible secure locations. Callan himself appeared at lunch, briefly moving through the kitchen with the focused economy of a man whose mind was already somewhere else. He'd been in his study since before Claire woke up. Mabel told her this without prompting, which suggested Mabel had decided to be informative, and there was no stopping her. Anything you need from the city, make a list, Callan told Claire at the kitchen island, pouring his own coffee, not sitting down. Someone will get it. I need to go back to work soon, Claire said. Callan looked at her over his mug. How soon? He said. A week, maybe. My manager's covering, but it's not a long-term solution. We can discuss transportation and security arrangements. I don't need an escort to the diner, Claire said. Sterling Redmond was in that hotel bar within 72 hours of knowing you were there, Callan said. His father is more patient, but significantly less friendly. Claire looked at him. She thought about arguing. She'd been thinking about arguing with Callan Whitmore since approximately the moment she'd gotten into his SUV, a sound like green wood splitting, and she'd been consistently failing to find the right angle, because the frustrating thing about him was that he wasn't unreasonable, he was just right about things she didn't want him to be right about. 1 week, she said, then I'm going back to my life. Understood, he said. He left the kitchen. Mabel watched him go, and then looked at Claire with an expression that communicated something between approval and warning. Claire refilled her own coffee and went to find the newspaper in the sunroom. The week passed faster than she expected it to. Part of this was Mabel, who was constitutionally incapable of leaving anyone unoccupied, and found Claire tasks with the casual authority of someone who assumed you'd be grateful for the direction. The garden needed putting to bed before hard frost. The pantry inventory hadn't been updated in 2 months. There was a bookshelf in the back sitting room, organizational collapsed following the departure of someone neither Mabel nor Callan mentioned. Claire did the garden work because physical activity was the only thing that reliably turned down the volume in her head, and because Mabel handed her gloves and tools with such matter-of-fact expectation that refusing felt more complicated than just doing it. The evenings were different. On the third evening, Callan appeared in the doorway of the sitting room where Claire was reading, and she looked up and he said, "There's food," and she followed him to the kitchen. And they ate at the island instead of the table, because neither of them made a move toward the table, and the island was already set. They talked about nothing in particular, at first her job, his in the most general and oblique terms. She asked him how he'd taken over from his father, and he told her more than she'd expected, though still not everything. His father had built the organization on specific principles of leverage and fear that Callan had found sustainable in the short term and corrosive in the long term. He spent the last 9 years trying to move significant portions of the Whitmore operation into legitimate territory construction, property management, a sound like green woods, investment while maintaining enough of the original structure to keep from losing everything to rivals before the transition could take hold. Is it working? Claire asked. Slowly, he said. Slower than I'd like. What does success look like? He considered the question with more seriousness than she'd anticipated. My grandfather started this organization when legal options weren't available to people who looked like him. That's a particular history. Success looks like the third generation having choices the first generation didn't. You want your kids to go legitimate. A pause. I don't have children, he said. I know. I meant theoretically. He looked at his plate for a moment. Yes, theoretically. On the fourth evening, she told him about her father. Not the whole story, she'd never told anyone, the whole story, but the shape of it. The leaving, the specific way his absence had reorganized everything she believed about whether stability was real, or just something people convinced themselves they had. Callan listened the way he did everything completely, without interruption, without filling the silence with reassurance before she'd finished. That's why Travis worked, she said finally. He seemed stable. He seemed like a man who stayed. He was performing stability, Callan said. I know that now. She looked at her glass. The infuriating thing is that I'm good at reading people. I've worked in a diner for 4 years, and reading people is basically the job. I should have seen it. He was motivated to be convincing, Callan said. That's not a failure of perception. That's someone working very hard to deceive you. Don't do that, Claire said. Do what? Make it easier than it was. I want to learn from it, which means I have to be honest about the parts where I made it easier for him. Callan was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Most people argue back, she said. Most people are uncomfortable with other people examining their own mistakes, he said. I'm not. She looked at him for a moment longer than she intended to. Then she picked up her glass and finished her water and said she was going to bed. And she went, and she didn't examine why the conversation sat with her all the way up the stairs and into the room and past the point where she turned off the light. On the 6th evening, they were in the same sitting room. Not by arrangement she had come in to read, and he had come in 20 minutes later with a folder of documents and taken the chair nearest the window, and they worked in parallel silence for almost an hour. A sound like comfortable, Claire had felt in the presence of another person in longer than she could immediately account for. She had been thinking about that when Callan's phone buzzed on the arm of his chair. He looked at the screen. Something happened in his face, not dramatic, just a closing. The particular way a person's expression seals itself when they've received information they need to process privately before they can respond to it. He stood up. I'll be a few minutes, he said. He left the room. He was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, the folder of documents was still on the chair, and Claire was still in the sitting room. Though she'd given up on reading because something about his face, when he'd looked at that screen, had installed a specific anxiety in her chest that wouldn't let her concentrate. He stood in the doorway. Sterling Redmond is dead, he said. She stared at him. He was found in his car in the South End, Callan said. 2 shots, close range. When earlier tonight. Gideon Redmond is being notified right now. He paused. Someone has already communicated to Gideon's people that the killing came from this organization. Did it? The question came out faster than she'd planned it. She held his gaze and didn't look away. No, Callan said. She believed him. She believed him, and she also understood in the same moment that believing him and being able to prove it were 2 different problems that were about to collide with enormous force. What does this mean? She said. It means Gideon Redmond is going to want retaliation, Callan said. And right now, all the available evidence points toward me. Can you find out who actually did it? My investigators are working on it. But I need time, and I don't know how much time Gideon is going to give me before he acts. He moved into the room and sat down in his chair, but he didn't pick up the folder. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment with the expression of someone doing rapid calculations they hadn't expected to be doing tonight. I need to get you further from Boston, he said. No. He looked up. No, Claire said again. I'm not going further from Boston. My annulment isn't finalized. My mother is in this city. My life is in this city. I am not going to be shipped somewhere safer while things happen around me. Claire, you told me in the car that she wasn't yours, she said. That she doesn't belong to anyone. I'm holding you to that. He stared at her. That's a different situation, he said. Is it? She leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, the second things get difficult, the instinct is to move me. And I've been moved enough. I've been managed enough. She stopped. Started again. I spent 8 months being managed by Travis Keaton and not knowing it. I would like to be the one who decides where I go from here. The room was quiet. Callan looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his expression, not concession exactly, but something adjacent. A recognition. All right, he said. All right, she said. And then, because the moment was enormous, and they were both pretending it was manageable, she said, "Tell me what you know about Sterling." "Everything," he told her. Sterling Redmond had been, by most accounts, the more manageable of the Redmond siblings, not gentle, but pragmatic, with enough self-interest to usually avoid direct confrontation when indirect routes were available. His death at close range suggested someone he knew, or someone he hadn't assessed as a threat. The location, a parked car in the South End at 9:30 on a weeknight, suggested a planned meeting, not a random encounter. Someone had arranged to meet Sterling Redmond. Someone he'd been comfortable enough with to get into a car alone. "Travis," Callan said. "Why would Travis kill Sterling?" Claire said. "Because Sterling's death creates a war between the Whitmore and Redmond organizations," Callan said. "And a war destroys both sides. Gideon's attention goes to me, not to collecting Travis's debt. My resources go to the conflict, not to investigating Travis." He let that settle. "He burns the creditors," Claire said quietly. "And disappears while we destroy each other," Callan said. Yes. She sat very still. She thought about Travis at the reception. The phone call. The deliberate way he'd grabbed her arm. The specific calculation she was now understanding had been behind every moment of their relationship. He hadn't married her because she was useful cover for an image. He'd married her because she was disposable, because if any part of his scheme required a sacrifice, a waitress from outside Boston, with no powerful connections, and no one who'd come looking on her behalf, was exactly the kind of sacrifice you chose. She pressed her thumb hard into her opposite palm and breathed. "You said your investigators are working on finding proof," she said. "Yes. What do they need? Financial transfers would be the clearest link. If Travis paid someone to kill Sterling, there's a money trail." "There always is." He paused. "We also need to identify the person Travis used. Whoever pulled the trigger was professional 2 shots, clean exit, no witnesses. That's not someone Travis found on short notice. So he planned this before the wedding," Claire said. Callan looked at her. "Before the wedding," she said again. "He was already planning to burn his creditors when he married me." The implications of that traveled through her slowly and thoroughly like cold water, finding every available space. He had married her already knowing he intended to destroy the people she might have needed protection from. He had placed her, deliberately, inside a situation that was about to explode. Her jaw tightened. "Find the proof," she said. "Whatever you need from me to help find it. I'll do it." Callan looked at her with the specific expression she was learning to identify as him reassessing something he'd already assessed. "You don't have to. I was the one he put in the middle of this," Claire said. "I have more reason to want it resolved than anyone." He didn't argue. They talked for another hour logistics, what his investigators had already established, what they were missing. At one point, Mabel appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of something she set down on the side table without a word and disappeared again. At 11:30, Claire went to bed. She lay in the dark with her eyes open, and the weight of everything rearranged itself around the new information: Travis's wedding, Travis's phone call, Sterling's death, Callan's organization, and the war being manufactured in its direction. A something seized in. She thought about what Callan had looked like sitting in that chair with his elbows on his knees and something behind his eyes that she was only now starting to have a vocabulary for. She thought about the way he'd said all right, not fine, not okay, all right, like it was a decision. She turned onto her side and looked at the dark window and told herself firmly and without any ambiguity that she was in the middle of a criminal organization's political crisis, and she needed to be useful and clear-headed, and she was absolutely not going to let whatever was happening in that sitting room distract her from the actual situation. Then she went to sleep and dreamed about nothing useful at all. Morning arrived with Mabel and eggs and the radio, and outside the window, the first real freeze of the season had arrived. Overnight thin ice on the garden's remaining puddles, frost on the dormant grass. The sky, the particular flat white of New England in late October, that meant winter, was arriving ahead of schedule. Callan came into the kitchen at 7:45. He poured coffee. He sat down at the island across from Claire. This was different from the previous mornings. "My investigator found something," he said. Claire set her mug down. "There's a transfer. 3 weeks before your wedding, Travis moved $48,000 from an account we didn't know he had to a shell company registered in Delaware." Callan turned his phone toward her. The screen showed a scanned document, financial routing numbers, a company name that meant nothing to Claire by itself. "The shell company is registered to a man with an 8-year history of contracting work in this city." "Contracting," Claire said carefully. "The kind people like Gideon Redmond use." She looked at the document. "So Travis hired someone," she said. 3 weeks before the wedding. He was already planning it." "We believe so. Is this enough to show Gideon?" "It's not enough to stop him," Callan said. "Gideon is a man who operated on certainty. He'll want the full chain, the transfer, the contractor, evidence connecting the contractor directly to Sterling's death. Right now we have the first link. How long to find the rest?" 48 hours, maybe 72. "And Gideon?" "My contact inside the Redmond organization says he's given himself a week to confirm the source before he acts," Callan said. "He doesn't want to start a war on wrong information. Gideon is ruthless but not impulsive." A pause. "Usually. So we have time." "We have some time," Callan said. They finished breakfast. The Spilikit, Mabel appeared, and collected plates with the efficiency of someone who had decided the conversation had gone on long enough and was resetting the space. At 9 o'clock, Callan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw set, he answered. A pause when, another pause. "I understand." He hung up. He looked at Claire. "Travis filed a statement with the police last night," he said. "He told them that Sterling Redmond approached him 3 weeks ago and threatened him over debts. He claims Sterling told him the Whitmore organization had agreed to absorb his debt in exchange for information about Redmond family operations." Claire stared at him. "He's creating a story," she said. "A story where Travis is the terrified civilian caught between two criminal organizations," Callan said. "Where he has no motive for Sterling's death. Where any money he moved was done under duress." He set the phone down on the island. "It's clean. He's had time to construct it. The transfer, he'll have an explanation. He's had 3 weeks to build one." The kitchen was very quiet. The frost outside the window caught the morning light and threw it back, cold and flat. "He's not running," Claire said. "He's fighting. He's buying time and covering his exit," Callan said. The statement creates noise. Investigators look at me, look at Gideon, spend time untangling the story he's built. By the time anyone focuses on Travis, he'll be gone. Claire pressed her palm flat on the island counter. She thought about Travis at the reception. She thought about his hand on her arm. A sound like green wood splitting. She thought about herself sitting on that concrete parking barrier in a second-hand wedding dress, still holding her bouquet, and she thought about how she'd sat there and told herself she just needed to figure out what came next. What came next was Travis Keaton burning everything around him and walking away. Unless someone stopped him. She lifted her eyes. Callan was watching her. "What do you need me to do?" she said. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise he had learned to expect her directness, or he was learning to. "But something. Nothing dangerous," he said immediately. "I didn't ask what was safe," she said. "I asked what you need." He held her gaze. Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the sound of the front door. Both of them turned. Mabel's voice came from the hallway, low, controlled, but with an edge in it that was out of character. Then footsteps. Then the kitchen doorway filled. Diane Hensley stood in the entrance in her good winter coat, her purse held in both hands in front of her, her face as arranged into the particular expression of a woman who had decided to do something and wasn't going to be argued out of it. She looked at Claire. Then she looked at Callan. Then she looked back at Claire. "Your phone has been going to voicemail since last night," Diane said. I called the diner. I called Dana. I drove here myself. How did you know where here was? Claire said. Dana found the hotel online. The hotel told me. Diane stopped. Regrouped. It doesn't matter. I'm your mother. She looked at Callan again, a longer look this time, the full assessing look of a woman who had been reading men carefully since her own husband walked out. And you must be the man my daughter got into a car with, at her own wedding. Callan said yes. Diane looked at him for 4 full seconds. Are you dangerous? She said. To specific people, Callan said. Not to your daughter. Another 4 seconds. I see, Diane said. Then she looked at Claire. Put on the kettle. I need tea, and you need to explain everything from the beginning. Claire looked at Callan. Callan looked at Claire. And in that exchange brief, almost nothing. The kind of glance that required no words, because the subtext was fully audible. Something passed between them that was not about Travis, or Sterling, or Gideon Redmond, or proof of financial transfers. Claire went to put on the kettle. She explained everything. It took the better part of 2 hours, sitting at the kitchen table with tea, that Mabel refreshed without being asked, while Diane listened, with her hands wrapped around her mug and her face performing the specific expression of a mother who is receiving information she both needs and wishes she didn't. When Claire finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. Travis used you, she said. Yes, Claire said. I tried to tell you. I know, you didn't, Mom. Diane stopped. She exhaled. She looked at her tea. I know, she said quietly. I know you know. She looked up. Are you safe here? Yes, Claire said. Are you? Diane hesitated. She glanced toward the door where Callan had left them 20 minutes earlier. Are you all right with him? Claire thought about all right with him. I'm all right with him, she said. Diane looked at her daughter for a long time, with the eyes of a woman who knew exactly what Claire was not saying and had decided for now to let her not say it. Okay, Diane said. Then tell me what needs to be done. A sound like green wood splitting. What needed to be done was apparently getting Diane safely back across the city before Gideon Redmond's people, who had been watching the estate perimeter since the previous night, noticed an unaccounted civilian arriving and decided to find out who she was. Callan organized this with the same quiet efficiency. He organized everything. One of his security team would escort Diane's car back to the apartment, staying well back, making sure she arrived without incident. Claire walked her mother to the front door. Diane paused on the threshold and turned back. She looked at Claire's face for a moment. Then she reached out and tucked a loose piece of Claire's hair back behind her ear, a gesture she'd been making since Claire was 7 years old, automatic and maternal and entirely impractical. You're not lost, Diane said. I want you to know that. I know this feels like all this feels like. She stopped. You're not lost. Claire's throat tightened. I know, she said. Diane went down the steps to her car. Claire stood in the doorway and watched the taillights disappear down the gravel drive until they were swallowed by the tree line and the flat white morning sky. Then she felt him behind her. Callan had come to stand in the hallway. Not close, just present. She's formidable, he said. She had to be, Claire said. She turned. He was closer than she'd expected, maybe 3 feet, which was not close by ordinary standards, but felt close in the quiet of the hallway, with the front door still open behind her and the cold October air moving in around them. She looked at him. He looked at her. A sound like green wood splitting, and she thought about every careful distance she'd been maintaining of the Millbrook Community Center. And she thought about his face in the sitting room the previous night, when he'd said all right, and she thought about the way Mabel had said, I don't know. An ordinary girl in a hotel like this, with a particular weight in her voice that suggested it was anything but a casual observation. She kissed him. She did it without planning to. Or rather, she did it in the way that decisions happen when you've been making the same decision for days without letting yourself know you were making it. It was not graceful. She stepped forward, and her hand found his jacket lapel, and she kissed him, and he was still for one sharp second, the stillness of someone who was genuinely surprised, which told her something she hadn't been sure of, and then he wasn't still anymore. His hand came up to the side of her face, and then his phone rang. He pulled back. He looked at the screen. Whatever was in his face went cold and focused in the stiffest she had learned to recognize as bad news arriving. He answered, listened, said 3 words she couldn't hear. He hung up. He looked at Claire with his hand still at the edge of her jaw, and he said, "Travis is gone." She stared. "He left his apartment 2 hours ago," Callan said. "His car was found at South Station. His phone is off. My investigator thinks he made a call this morning. We're tracking it, but we don't know to who." The cold came in through the still open door. Claire stood in the hallway of Callan Whitmore's estate, with the evidence of a kiss still in the air between them and the full weight of the morning's events arranged around her. And she understood with sudden, absolute clarity that whatever had just shifted between them, whatever wall had just come down, it had done so at the exact moment that Travis Keaton had decided to disappear. She closed the front door. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way you close a door when you need the physical act of closing something to help you organize your thoughts. The latch caught. The cold stopped coming in. The hallway went quiet. Callan was already on a second call, moving toward his study, his voice low and rapid and entirely focused. She heard fragments: South Station, 2 hours, which platform, and then the study door pulled most of the sound away, and she was standing alone in the hallway, with her hand still on the door handle. She let go of it. She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Travis was gone. He had filed a statement with the police, a careful, pre-constructed statement that pointed every finger away from himself. And then he had walked out of his apartment, abandoned his car, turned off his phone, and disappeared. Which meant the statement wasn't a defense. It was a distraction. He'd built it to buy himself the hours he needed to move, and now he was moving, and nobody knew where. She pushed off the wall. She went to the kitchen, because she needed something to do with her hands. And Mabel was there, and Mabel's presence was, she had discovered, functionally stabilizing in the way that very competent people in a crisis are stabilizing not because they make things better immediately, but because they continue to exist at the same temperature regardless of what's happening around them. Mabel looked up from the counter. She looked at Claire's face. She turned and put the kettle on without saying anything. "Travis ran," Claire said. "I heard," Mabel said. The walls in the estate were thick, but Mabel had spent 22 years learning their acoustics. "He built a story for the police, and then he ran." "Yes." "Which means every careful thing Callan's investigator found the transfer, the shell company Travis already knows they exist. Or he assumed they would be found, and he's decided that being gone is better than being present for the consequences." "Likely," Mabel said. "So wherever he's going, he planned it before last night." Mabel set a mug in front of her. "Drink that." Claire drank it. It was not tea, it was coffee, black, stronger than anything she'd make for herself. She drank it anyway. Her mind was working through the geometry of it. Travis disappearing meant the proof Callan needed, the full chain, the contractor, the direct connection to Sterling's murder, was now considerably harder to obtain. The man at the center of it had removed himself from the board, which left Callan holding partial evidence, a story that the police had already received in Travis's preferred version, and a Gideon Redmond who was running out of patience. The kettle clicked off. Mabel poured her own coffee and sat down across the island. "You kissed him," Mabel said. Claire looked at her. "In the hallway," Mabel said, completely without expression. "I was in the sitting room. The door was open." "Mabel, I'm not commenting. I'm establishing that I know." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "He hasn't let anyone close in 9 years. Not since Eleanor." Claire waited. Mabel's jaw shifted slightly. A woman he cared about. Before he took over from his father decided she was a liability. "What happened to her?" Claire said, though she already felt the answer in the way Mabel's face had gone careful. "She died," Mabel said. "Car accident that wasn't an accident. Callan was supposed to meet her. He was 24. He found out what his father had ordered after the fact." A pause. "He took control of the organization 3 weeks later." The kitchen was very quiet. "And his father?" Claire said. "Heart attack," Mabel said. 6 months after Callan took the reins. She said it with the same neutral tone she'd used to describe everything else. Claire did not ask for elaboration. "He carries that," Claire said. "Every day," Mabel said. "He believes the people around him are safer when he keeps distance." She looked at Claire directly. "Do you know what you're walking toward?" "I'm not walking toward anything," Claire said. We kissed in a hallway and then his phone rang. Yes, Mabel said. And you're still sitting here thinking about it instead of going to lie down. Claire looked at her coffee. He's not his father, Claire said. No, Mabel said quietly. He's not. Callan came back into the kitchen 40 minutes later. His jacket was off, and his sleeves were pushed up, and he had the look of someone who had been working the phone hard for an extended period, a specific kind of controlled exhaustion that lived around the eyes. He stopped when he saw them both at the island. He poured himself coffee. Travis used a burner phone this morning, he said. We traced the number. He made one call, sent 6:18 a.m., 14 minutes long. He set the coffee pot down. The number belongs to a woman named Carla Weston. She's a former Redmond employee logistics 3 years ago, until Gideon let her go. She works for Travis now, Claire said. She works for whoever's paying her, Callan said. She has a car registered to an address in Worcester. We think she picked him up from South Station. So he has a driver, Claire said. Which means he has a destination. We're working on it. He sat down at the island. He looked at Claire, one direct look, clean and brief, that acknowledged the hallway, and then set it aside with the specific disciplines of ones who had learned to compartmentalize under pressure. The more immediate problem is Gideon. My contact says he moved his timeline up. He's no longer giving himself a week. How long? 48 hours. He wants a meeting with you. With me. Claire absorbed this. What happens at the meeting? I present what I have, Callan said. The financial transfer, the shell company, the contractor's history. I make the argument that his son was killed by someone who needed both our organizations destroyed. He paused. And I hope it's enough, because if Gideon decides it's not, the meeting becomes the starting point for something I cannot contain. What do you need for the meeting that you don't have? The contractor's identity confirmed. Right now I have a shell company, not a name. He turned his phone toward her, another financial document, another routing chain. My investigator is working backward from the Delaware registration. It's close, but I need his phone rang. He looked at it. He answered immediately. Talk to me, a pause, longer than the previous pauses. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a settling like a building, absorbing a tremor. Send it to the secure line. All of it, he hung up. He looked at the phone for a moment. Then he looked at Claire. They found the contractor, he said. She straightened. His name is Ray Coulter, Callan said. Former military. He's been operating in the Boston area for 4 years. Contract work, the kind that doesn't appear in any public record. He paused. He was arrested this morning in Providence. Unrelated charge, traffic stop, outstanding warrant. His prints are in the system. So the police have him, Claire said. Yes, which is complicated. If the Providence PD connects him to Sterling's murder before we can, the chain of evidence goes through official channels. Travis's version of events becomes part of the official record first. He set the phone down. But if my investigator can access the arrest record and confirm the financial connections, can he? Callan looked at her with the expression of someone choosing how to answer. Yes, he said. She understood what that meant and didn't ask how. Then do it, she said. Get the confirmation and take it to Gideon. He looked at her for a moment. You're not going to... He stopped. What? Object. She looked at him. To what? To the part where my investigator accesses a law enforcement database through channels that aren't legal. She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Travis planned a murder before our wedding, she said. He used me as cover. He filed a false statement with the police this morning, and then he ran. I am not currently in a position to be precious about which channels we use to find him. Something moved across Callan's face that might have been in another man, relief. In him it was quieter than that. All right, he said. He picked up his phone. He was in his study for 3 hours. Claire spent those hours doing something she had not done since arriving at the estate. She sat in the back sunroom with the dormant garden visible through the glass wall, and she thought about Travis Keaton with complete deliberateness, the way you make yourself press on a bruise to understand how deep it goes. She thought about the first time she'd met him at a mutual friend's party, and how he'd been easy to talk to in the specific way that certain people are easy to talk to because they're listening for what you want to hear and then saying it. She hadn't identified that at the time. She had identified it as warmth. She thought about the second time she'd asked him, about Blair, not the third time, the second, and how he'd said her name with a specific kind of weariness that had seemed like genuine over-itness, and was actually, she now understood, practiced performance. She thought about the wedding dress at the consignment shop and the way Travis had seemed touched when she'd showed him photos of it. She thought about what Callan had said. He was motivated to be convincing. She pressed her thumb into her palm. Then she stopped doing that because it wasn't useful, and she looked at the frozen garden, and she thought about Ray Coulter in a Providence holding cell with financial transfers that connected him to a murder that connected him to Travis. And she thought about what happened to Travis when that chain became undeniable. She thought about what she wanted to happen to Travis. She was still sitting there when the sunroom door opened. She expected Mabel. It was Callan. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He had his jacket back on. His sleeves were down. "We have the confirmation," he said. "Coulter's arrest record shows a secondary phone. One of the numbers in it matches the shell company's registered contact. There's also a credit transfer, $15,000, 4 days before Sterling's death, from the shell company account to a prepaid card registered to Coulter's sister." "That's the chain," Claire said. "Most of it. Enough." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "The meeting with Gideon is tonight. He moved it again. He wants it now." "Where?" "A restaurant in the Back Bay. Neutral. Ground by agreement." He looked at her. "I'll take 2 of my people. Gideon will have his own." "What happens if he doesn't believe you?" "He will," Callan said. "He's a man who values precision. When I lay this out for him, precisely with documentations." "What happens if he doesn't?" Claire said again. The silence stretched. "Then I deal with what comes," Callan said. "But Claire?" "I'll stay here," she said. "With Mabel." "I know." He looked at her. "I'll be back by 10, he said. He left at 6. The estate went quiet in the specific way it quiet when Callan wasn't at a different texture of silence, less inhabited. Claire ate dinner with Mabel at the kitchen table. They talked about nothing critical, Mabel's sister in Connecticut, the garden, what Claire had studied briefly in community college before the double shifts at Fenwick's had consumed everything. Normal conversation, the kind that makes abnormal circumstances bearable. At 8:15, Mabel went to wash up. At 8:20, Claire heard the front door. She stood up from the kitchen table. She told herself it was Callan, back early, but the footsteps were wrong. Callan moved quietly. These footsteps were heavy and fast, and there were too many of them. She heard the hallway, heard a sound she couldn't immediately identify, heard Mabel's voice in the distance rise sharply and then stop. She stood very still. The kitchen doorway filled. Travis Keaton looked terrible. He was still in the clothes he'd been wearing when he'd left his apartment: dark jeans, a gray jacket, a jacket that was doing nothing against the cold he'd been out in because his face was wind raw and his eyes were the specific bright dark of someone running on adrenaline and something else. His hair was wrong. He was holding a gun with the particular grip of someone who had practiced holding it, but didn't usually. Beside him stood a woman, Claire didn't know, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, the flat expression of someone doing a job. Carla Weston. She had Claire's phone from the counter in her hand. She removed the battery and set both pieces on the floor. "Sit down," Travis said. Claire didn't sit down. "Where's Whitmore?" Travis said. "I don't know," Claire said. I don't know where he is," she said again. Her voice was level. She was watching his hands, watching the way the gun was angled, pointed vaguely in her direction, but not with the practiced certainty of someone who had decided to use it. "Not yet, Travis. What are you doing?" "Fixing it," he said. "I'm fixing the situation where you had Sterling Redmond murdered and then ran," she said. "That situation?" His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Ray Coulter," she said. "The shell company in Delaware. $15,000 to his sister 4 days before." The gun came up. "Stop talking," Travis said. She stopped. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the refrigerator. Outside, the October dark was complete. Mabel had not reappeared, which meant either she was somewhere in the house incapacitated, or she was somewhere in the house, being very, very careful, and Claire did not know which, and could not find out without moving. She did not move. I needed more time, Travis said. His voice had the particular quality of a man explaining something to himself as much as to her. I had a plan. It was working. Whitmore wasn't supposed to get involved. He was supposed to be dealing with Gideon. I was supposed to have 3 weeks to clear out. He ran his free hand across his face. Then you got in his car. I got in his car because you grabbed my arm in a parking lot, Claire said. I was trying to explain. You were trying to control the situation, she said. That's what you always do. You try to control the situation, and when it doesn't work, you blame the situation. Claire, his voice dropped. I don't want to hurt you. I know, she said. I'm not useful to you, hurt. Something crossed his face at that, a specific flinch, almost human. For one fraction of a second, he looked like the man she'd thought she was marrying. Then it was gone. The Redmonds will pay my debt if I bring them something they want, he said. Something Gideon wants more than retaliation. She understood before he finished. You, she said. He wants information about Whitmore's operation. And you're bringing him leverage. It won't take long, Travis said. A few hours. I hand you to Gideon. Gideon gets what he wants, And what? Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, and she didn't try to soften it. What happens to me when Gideon gets what he wants? Travis didn't answer. She looked at him. You don't know, she said. Or you do know, and you've decided that's not your problem. Stop it. Which one is it, Travis? Stop, because from where I'm standing it looks like you've done this before, she said. You see a person. You evaluate what they're worth to you, and you use them until they're not worth anything anymore. And this is just the next version of that. That's not. He stopped. His face had reddened. The gun hand was shaking very slightly. That's not fair. You had a man killed, Claire said. Before our wedding. You had already paid for it before you walked me down the aisle. I needed the debt gone. You had him killed. It was the only way. There is no version of this where that sentence ends correctly, she said. There is no completion to that sentence that makes it anything other than what it is. The kitchen went completely still. Travis's face had gone through several things in the last 30 seconds: anger, defensiveness, something that looked dangerously close to grief, and she watched it carefully because the gun was still in his hand and the man holding it was unraveling, and an unraveling man with a gun was the most specific kind of dangerous. Carla Weston was watching from the doorway. Not the scene, she was watching the hallway, the exits, the professional attention of someone who was tracking variables. Travis took a breath. Get your coat, he said. No, Claire said. Claire, no. The word was quiet and absolute, and it seemed to catch him off guard more than shouting would have. You think Whitmore is going to come for you? Travis said. He's in a meeting with Gideon right now. He has no ideas. I know he's in a meeting with Gideon, Claire said. I also know what he's showing Gideon at that meeting. Travis went still. The transfer, she said. The shell company. Ray Coulter's arrest record and the financial connection to the murder. She watched his face change. By the time you get me to wherever you're taking me, Gideon Redmond will already know that his son wasn't killed by Callan Whitmore. He'll know it was you. Travis stared at her. You're bluffing, he said. I don't bluff, she said. I'm a waitress. I don't have the budget for it. 3 seconds. 5. The gun hand was shaking more visibly now. Get your coat, Travis said again, but the authority in it had cracked down the middle. Carla Weston turned from the doorway. We need to move, she said. Flat. Professional. The voice of someone whose timeline was fixed, regardless of the emotional content of the room. Travis looked at Claire. She looked back. A sound zine. She thought about everything. Callan had shown her the documents, the chain of evidence, the meeting tonight, and she thought about the 14 minutes Travis had spent on the phone with this woman this morning. And she thought about the front door coming open and Mabel's voice stopping. And she made a decision that was not brave. The way movies make decisions look brave. It was just the only available option that wasn't complete surrender. She turned toward the back door. Travis crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and grabbed her. Not her arm this time, her shoulder, and then his arm came around her from behind, and the gun was against her ribs, and she could feel him breathing fast and shallow against the back of her head. Don't, he said. Don't make this worse. She went still. Her heart was enormous in her chest. She could feel each beat of it separately, which she'd never consciously experienced before. The refrigerator hummed. Outside the window, darkness. The gun was cold even through her sweater. "Okay," she said. "Quiet, okay." She let him move her toward the hallway. They went through the house. Travis, Claire, Carla Weston behind them. The front hallway, past the sitting room where she and Callan had talked 3 nights ago, past the study door, to the front door. Mabel Prescott was on the hallway floor. She was breathing. Claire checked immediately, the specific desperate assessment breathing, conscious, her eyes open and tracking, a reddening at her temple where she'd hit something or been hit. She looked at Claire. Her expression said, "I'm here and go." Claire looked at her for 1 second. Then Travis pushed her through the door and into the dark. The cold was total and immediate. The gravel of the drive was loud under their feet. There was a car, not the SUV she recognized. Something else, something Carla had driven running at the end of the drive with its lights off. Travis walked her toward it. Claire walked. She thought about the evidence at Gideon Redmond's table right now. She thought about Callan's voice when he'd said all right. She thought about Mabel on the hallway floor, looking at her with that specific expression. She thought about what she'd told Travis in the kitchen. She'd told him Gideon would know it was him. She didn't know whether that was true yet. She'd said it, because it was the only thing she had the possibility that Travis's plan was already collapsing, that the leverage he was trying to create was already worthless, that bringing her to Gideon wouldn't buy him anything. She didn't know if Callan had reached Gideon yet. She didn't know if the meeting had happened. She didn't know if the evidence was enough. She knew one thing with absolute certainty as Travis's hand pushed her toward the waiting car. Whatever happened in the next few hours would be the thing that divided her life cleanly into before and after, and the woman she was before the woman who had sat on a concrete parking barrier in a second-hand wedding dress and tried not to fall apart was already gone. The woman getting pushed into the back of a stranger's car in the dark of a Massachusetts estate was someone she was still becoming. She got in. The door closed. Carla Weston got in the front. The car began to move. Travis sat beside Claire with the gun resting on his knee, pointed nowhere specific, the posture of a man who had committed to a plan he was no longer certain would work and didn't have any other plan to switch to. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. "You're going to have to live with all of this," she said. He said nothing. "Whatever happens tonight, you're going to have to live with every choice that got you here." "Claire," he said. Warning. "I know you won't shoot me," she said. "Because I'm the only thing you have left that's worth anything to anyone. The moment you pull that trigger, I'm worthless and you're finished." She watched his profile in the dark of the car. "So you're going to sit and listen to me say it. One time you had a man killed. You used me to do it, and you've known since before our wedding that if it came down to it, you would hand me over to save yourself." His jaw moved. "Is there any part of you," she said, "that's sorry?" The car moved through the darkness. Trees, road, the outer edges of Boston approaching. Travis didn't answer. She turned away from him and looked out the window at the passing dark and the lights of the city beginning to resolve in the distance, and she breathed steadily, in and out, the way you breathe when you need to stay functional and feeling everything simultaneously. And she thought about Callan sitting across a table from Gideon Redmond right now, and she thought about the evidence, and she thought about whether it would be enough and how much time she had and what she was going to do when the car stopped. The car stopped, not at a restaurant, not at a house. An industrial lot in the eastern edge of the city, the kind of area that was all corrugated walls and chain link, and the particular smell of river and rust that meant they were near the waterfront. A warehouse, the kind of building that exists in every city and gets used, in narratives like this one, for exactly the purpose it was about to be used for. Carla got out. Travis got out. He opened Claire's door and looked at her in the dim light from somewhere distant. "Come on," he said. She got out. She stood on the cracked pavement and looked at the warehouse and the darkness around it, and Travis beside her with the gun, and Carla moving ahead to check the entrance. And she made the assessment the same way she'd made it in the kitchen. Not brave, just practical. What were her options? What did she have? What could she work with? Travis pushed her forward. She went inside. The warehouse was cold and smelled of old metal and something chemical she couldn't identify, and the specific emptiness of a space that hadn't been properly inhabited in years. Industrial lighting from one bank of fixtures in the center of the ceiling, harsh and yellow, and casting shadows in the wrong directions. There was a chair in the center of the floor. The kind of chair that, in this context, meant only one thing. Carla was already there with zip ties. Claire looked at the chair. She looked at Travis. "Sit down," he said, and the gun was up properly this time, with the particular steadiness of someone who had made a decision about whether he would use it and had arrived at yes. She sat. Carla worked fast wrists behind the chair, ankles secured, a length of something around her midsection that pinned her to the back. Not cruel, efficient, the work of someone who'd done this before and had no particular feeling about doing it again. Travis watched. When Carla finished, he crouched in front of Claire and looked at her from approximately eye level, and she saw in his face the specific devastation of a man who was fully aware of what he was doing and doing it anyway because the alternative was consequences he couldn't survive. That was the most frightening version of him, not the rage, not the desperation, the awareness. "Gideon will be here in an hour," Travis said. "You tell him what he asks. You answer his questions about Whitmore's operation. That's all. You do that and what?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't finish the sentence. He stood up. He walked away from her toward the far end of the warehouse, where Carla had set up something on a folding table, a laptop, a phone, the logistics of waiting. Claire sat in the chair with her wrists behind her back, and the cold floor of an empty warehouse under her feet, and the industrial light making everything look like the inside of a headache, and she looked at the ceiling, and she breathed. In out. She thought about what she'd told Travis in the kitchen. She thought about whether Callan had reached Gideon yet, whether the evidence had landed, whether any part of the plan she'd watched being constructed over 3 days was still intact, or whether Travis's disappearance had unraveled everything before it could matter. She thought about Mabel. On the hallway floor, she thought about the front door of the estate and how it had felt to walk through it into the dark. She thought about the woman she was still becoming. Then she stopped thinking about all of it and focused on the zip tie on her right wrist because it had been applied in a hurry. And Carla, whatever her other qualities, had left approximately 3 millimeters more slack than she needed to. And 3 millimeters was not much, but it was. Not nothing. 3 millimeters of slack. Claire had worked double shifts at Fenwick's for 4 years. She had carried trays of food for 8 hours at a stretch and opened stuck pickle jars and once, memorably, restrained a drunk man from going behind the counter by holding his wrist with both hands and leaning her full weight backward until her manager arrived. Her hands were not delicate. Her wrists were not small. She began working the zip tie, not frantically, slow and deliberate, the way you do something when you can't afford to be seen doing it and you can't afford to fail. She rotated her right wrist inward, millimeter by millimeter, feeling for the point where the plastic was thinnest, where the lock mechanism sat, where pressure could become leverage. Across the warehouse, Travis was on the phone. Low voice. She couldn't hear the words. Carla was at the folding table, back to Claire, working the laptop. She kept working. The plastic bit into her skin. She let it. Pain was information. It told her where the edge was, which meant she could work right up to it. Her shoulder joint ached from the angle. She ignored that too. She thought about the zip tie on her left wrist. She thought about her ankles. She thought about the restraint across her midsection, which was the loosest of all of them, because Carla had run it around the chair's back rails, and the chair was old and the rails had some give. Not much. But this was an evening of not much. She thought about the door. She had counted the steps from the entrance to this chair. 31 steps in the dark and cold outside. There was cracked pavement, and then chain link, and then whatever was beyond that. She had not seen a second vehicle. She did not know how Gideon Redmond would arrive, or how many people he would bring. She knew he would arrive in less than an hour. She kept working. The right zip tie moved. Not broke, moved. The lock slipped a fraction, and the plastic shifted, and her wrist had approximately 4 millimeters of rotation, now instead of 3. She exhaled through her nose. She rotated further. The pain spiked up her forearm, and she converted it into information and kept going. Travis ended his call. She stilled her hands immediately. He didn't look at her. He crossed to Carla, said something she couldn't hear. Carla shook her head. Travis looked at his phone. Whatever he was waiting to hear from, he hadn't heard it yet. He looked at Claire. She looked back, neutral, hands behind the chair back, wrists together, the picture of resigned compliance. He looked away. She went back to work. 4 millimeters became 5. 5 became a space she could think about. She felt the edge of the lock mechanism under her thumb, and she pressed against it steadily, not hard enough to snap it, but hard enough to stress the plastic incrementally. The way you crack something, you need to crack quietly. She thought about Callan. She thought about him at a table in the back bay with Gideon Redmond and the evidence laid out between them. She thought about whether the meeting had happened yet, whether Gideon had received it, whether it had been enough. She thought about the moment he'd left the estate at. She thought about the moment he'd given her that direct, clean look that acknowledged the hallway and set it aside, and she thought about whether he knew yet that she was gone. She thought about Mabel on the floor. Her jaw tightened. She pressed harder. The zip tie snapped. The sound was small, a soft plastic click, and she went completely still, heart slamming, watching Travis and Carla across the warehouse. Neither of them turned. The refrigeration unit somewhere in the back of the building had cycled on at the right moment. Background noise, swallowing a small sound. She waited 10 seconds. Then she moved her right hand slowly from behind the chair and brought it forward and pressed her palm flat against her thigh, the trembling in her fingers. Her wrist was bleeding where the plastic had cut in. She could feel it without looking at it, warm and thin and ignorable. She reached for her left wrist. Different angle. Worse. She had to reach across behind her back with her free right hand to get purchase on the second tie, which required her to lean forward slightly, which put tension on the midsection restraint and made the chair creak. She went still. Travis looked up. She met his eyes. "Can I have water?" she said. He stared at her. "My mouth is dry," she said. "I've been sitting here. Can I have water?" He looked at Carla. Carla didn't have water. Travis looked back at Claire with the expression of a man who understood that his former wife asking for water while zip-tied to a chair was not actually a complicated problem, and the correct response was to solve it, because it was easier than explaining why he hadn't. "In a few minutes," he said. She nodded. He looked away. She went back to work. Left wrist. The angle was brutal and she couldn't get the same leverage, but she worked the plastic against itself, using the chair rail as a brace, and after what felt like 8 minutes, but was probably 4, the second tie gave, not with a click, but with a slower tearing sound that she masked by shifting in the chair and making it creak again. Her hands were free. She kept them behind her back. She looked at the warehouse door. 31 steps. Carla between her and the door. Travis between her and Carla. The ankle restraints, which she could not address without bending forward visibly. The midsection restraint, which would require her to stand to clear the chair back. She thought about it for exactly as long as she could afford. Then the warehouse door opened. Not her door, the large loading door on the far end, the one she hadn't been brought through. It rolled upward on its track with the particular grinding noise of something that worked but barely, and cold air and diesel smell came in with it. And the headlights of 2 vehicles swept through the space and found every corner before the engines cut. Gideon Redmond. He was not what she'd constructed from the fragments she'd been given. She'd built him, from Callan's descriptions, at something monolithic large, physically imposing, the physical embodiment of the organization he'd built. The man who came through the loading door was average height, late 60s, gray-haired, wearing a coat that looked like it had come from the same quality of tailor as Callan's suits. He walked with a slight forward lean like a man whose back hurt and who had decided that acknowledging this was not an option. He was followed by 4 people, 2 in front, 2 behind. Not ostentatious, they positioned themselves and became still, and that was all. Gideon looked at the warehouse. He looked at Carla. He looked at Travis. He looked at Claire. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did a specific sharpening, the eyes of someone calibrating a situation. "This is her," he said. "Yes," Travis said. Gideon walked toward Claire. Not fast. The walk of a man who had learned that urgency was a form of weakness. He stopped 6 feet from her and looked at her the way you look at something you're trying to accurately price. "You've been at Whitmore's estate," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "For how long?" "About a week, and in that time—" He paused. "Precise. What did you learn about his organization? His operations? His people?" Claire looked at him. She thought about everything Callan had told her over those evenings at the kitchen island. Not operational details, he'd never given her operational details. But other things. The shape of what he was building, the direction he was moving the organization, the legitimate investments, the properties. The investigators and what they were investigating. She thought about what Gideon was actually asking. He wasn't asking for friendship. He was asking for information that could be used as leverage against Callan, information that could give Gideon an advantage in whatever conflict he was preparing for, information that Gideon believed she had because she'd spent a week inside Callan's home. She looked at Gideon Redmond, and she said, "Nothing." He tilted his head. "Nothing," she said again. He was careful. "He didn't tell me anything useful. I'm a waitress from outside Boston, Mr. Redmond. I was there because it was the most secure location available after Sterling Redmond cornered me in a hotel bar and grabbed my wrist." She held his gaze. "Which I assume you know about." Something moved across Gideon's face. "My son," he said, and those 2 words cost him something. The only moment in the conversation so far that had. "I'm sorry for your loss," Claire said, genuinely. "Don't," he said. "Quiet." Hard, she stopped. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he turned to Travis. "She has nothing," he said. "You brought me a woman with nothing." Travis's jaw worked. "She was there for a week. She had access to a kitchen," Gideon said, "and a sunroom, and whatever Whitmore decided to give her." He sounded tired in a way that was more frightening than anger. "I didn't come here for a woman who has nothing. She matters to him," Travis said. "That has value. Has he contacted you?" Gideon turned back to Claire. "Since you were taken. Has he tried to reach you?" "My phone was destroyed," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what he knows yet." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then his own phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His face did something she had not expected and did not have a clear category, for it was not rage, not grief, not surprise. It was the face of a man who has received information that reorganizes everything he thought he knew and is processing that reorganization in real time while maintaining the surface of a man who is in control of the room. He read whatever was on the screen for a full 10 seconds. Then he looked at Travis. The quality of that look changed the temperature of the warehouse. Travis saw it. What Travis said. "Whitmore came to me tonight," Gideon said. His voice was very level. He brought documentation. Financial transfers, a shell company in Delaware. The arrest record of a man named Ray Coulter with telephone and financial connections that link him directly to my son's death. He put the phone away. He also brought testimony from Coulter's attorney given 2 hours ago in Providence, confirming that Coulter was contracted for the killing 3 weeks before it occurred. The warehouse was silent. Travis's face had gone through white and arrived somewhere past it. 3 weeks before the killing, Gideon said. Before your wedding. Before any of this. He took one step toward Travis. You planned this before you married her. Travis opened his mouth. Don't, Gideon said. One word, absolute. Travis closed his mouth. Gideon looked at Claire. Something in his expression, not warmth. Nothing as available as that, but a specific recognition. The look of a man who understands that the woman in the chair is the least complicated person in the room. Release her, he said to Carla. Carla looked at Travis. She doesn't work for you, Gideon said to Travis. He said it without looking at him. Release her. Carla moved to Claire and cut the ankle ties and the midsection restraint with a folding knife she produced from her jacket. Matter of fact. She'd already understood that the situation had redistributed. Claire stood up. Her legs were stiff from the chair, and she took one moment to press her feet into the floor and find her balance. Her wrist was bleeding quietly. She pressed her thumb against it. She looked at Gideon. "Whitmore knows where you are," Gideon said to her. It was not quite a question. "He knows I was taken from the estate," she said. "Whether he knows where I am," the loading door exploded inward. Not metaphorically. The large rolling door came off its track with a sound like a truck impact, metal screaming against concrete, and cold air hit the warehouse like a fist. And then there were people moving through it, and light, actual flashlight-grade light, sweeping across the space. Claire dropped. She did it by instinct, the instinct of someone who'd heard that sound and understood before her brain caught up that being at standing height in a room that had just been breached was the wrong choice. She went to the concrete and stayed flat and put her arms over her head. Shouting. Multiple voices, some overlapping. Two from the new arrivals, calm, directed, the controlled shouting of people executing a plan, and one from Carla and one from Travis, which was not calm. She looked up. Callan. He was through the door before the door had finished moving, and he wasn't alone. 4 of his people spread into the space in the practiced geometry of people who'd done this before. 2 of Gideon's men had moved, but Gideon himself had raised one hand in a gesture that meant stop, and they'd stopped, which meant Gideon had made an assessment, and the assessment was that whatever was happening right now was not the fight he was preparing for. Callan was crossing the warehouse floor. He'd found Claire immediately before he'd looked at Travis, before he'd acknowledged Gideon, before he'd assessed anything else in the room. He'd found her on the floor, and he was moving toward her, and the look on his face was the most unguarded thing she'd seen from him. She got to her feet because she did not want him to reach her while she was on the floor. She almost made it. He reached her before she was fully upright, and his hand came to her face, and he looked at her with the inventory of a man checking for damaged eyes, face, the wrist she was pressing, and she said, "I'm okay," and he said nothing for a moment. And then, "Your wrist, it's minor." "Claire, I broke the zip tie myself," she said. "I'm okay." He looked at her for one long moment. Then he turned. Travis had not run. She would think about this later, the fact that Travis, faced with Callan Whitmore and 4 of his people, and Gideon Redmond and Gideon's 4 people, did not run. Maybe he'd calculated that there was nowhere to run to. Maybe the part of him that had been performing confidence for so long had failed to update in time. He was standing near the folding table with the gun, still in his hand, held at his side. Callan walked toward him. Not fast. Not the charge of a man operating on adrenaline. The walk of someone who has made a decision and is executing it without urgency, because urgency would imply doubt. "Put it down," Callan said. Travis looked at the gun. Then at Callan. Then at the room, Gideon, the men, Claire on her feet near the door. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," Travis said. "No," Callan said. "Put it down." She was supposed to be. Travis stopped. Gideon was supposed to. He stopped again. "It's over," Callan said. "The documentation is with Gideon." Coulter gave a statement. "The police in Providence are connecting it to Sterling's murder tonight. He was 10 feet from Travis. There's nowhere this ends well for you. The only variable is what happens in this building in the next 60 seconds. Travis looked at Claire. She met his eyes across the warehouse. She thought about every version of this man. She'd encountered the easy warmth at the party, the practiced reassurance, the hand on her arm in the parking lot, the gun against her ribs in the kitchen. A thought before splitting. She thought about him crouching in front of her chair to tell her Gideon was coming, and the look on his face when he hadn't the sentence about what would happen after. She had nothing to give him, not hate, not grief, nothing. The kind of empty that only happens when the story you told yourself about someone has been completely dismantled, piece by piece, until there's no version left to feel anything toward. She turned her eyes away from him. Travis's arm came up. The gun came with it, and for one terrible fraction of a second, she thought he was pointing it at her. She felt Callan's body shift in front of her, felt rather than saw him move to block her line, and then she understood that the gun was pointed at Callan. "Don't," Travis said. His voice had cracked somewhere in the last 30 seconds. "Don't tell me it's over. You don't get to walk in here," and he couldn't finish. The gun was shaking. "She was supposed to be mine. She was supposed to be... She was never yours," Callan said. Very quiet. "She was never anyone's. 10 feet between them. 10 feet and a shaking gun, and Travis Kent looking at a man who stood completely still in front of a loaded weapon with no indication of fear. And Claire had a terrible moment of understanding that this was what the organization had made Callan, not invincible, but capable of standing exactly here, in exactly this, without flinching. She also had a terrible moment of understanding that if Travis pulled that trigger, still shaking, at 10 feet, the margin for missing was insufficient. "Travis," she said. He looked at her. "Don't," she said. "Not because of him, because of you. You'll never recover from this version." Something in his face, not quite human, the last version of human. The gun stayed up. Then two things happened in the same second. Carla Weston, who had been standing near the folding table in the specific stillness of someone waiting for her moment, moved not toward the door, but toward Travis, with the flat professional intention of someone who had just recalculated the math and determined that Travis Keaton was no longer an asset. And one of the men Callan had brought through the door raised something Claire didn't immediately identify, not a gun, a different profile, and fired. The sound was sharp and pneumatic, not the gunshot she'd braced for. Travis dropped the weapon. He dropped it, and his shoulder dropped with it, and he went to one knee on the concrete, making a sound between a gasp and a yell, and the gun skidded across the floor and stopped. Callan was already there, 2 steps, 3, and he was kneeling over the gun, picking it up, clear. Travis was on the concrete with his hand pressed to his shoulder and blood coming through his jacket. Not arterial, the marksman had known exactly where, exactly how. Exactly enough to disable without killing, and Travis was looking at the blood on his hand, with the face of someone who has arrived at consequence and did not believe it would actually feel like this. Carla Weston had stopped moving. Gideon Redmond had not moved once. Claire became aware that she was breathing, had been breathing the whole time, but was now becoming aware of it as a separate fact, and that her legs were steady, and her wrist was bleeding, and she was still on her feet. One of Callan's people was on a phone. She heard fragments, location, medical arriving. She heard another word, police. Callan came back to her. He looked at her face. He looked at her wrist. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded cloth, a pocket square, white, the kind of detail that in any other moment would have seemed absurd, and he took her wrist and pressed the cloth against it and held it there. "Hospital," he said. "It's not that deep, hospital," he said again. Not arguable, she let him hold her wrist. Across the warehouse, Travis was sitting on the concrete, with his back against the folding table and one of Gideon's men standing near him. Not restraining him, just near. Travis was looking at the floor. "He should go to the police," Claire said. She wasn't sure she was talking to Callan exactly. She was just saying it into the air of the warehouse. He should go through the actual system. Trial. All of it on record. "Yes," Callan said. She looked at him. "I already made that call," he said. "Before we came in. Providence PD are 20 minutes out. There's enough to hold him on kidnapping and to hold the murder charge while the Coulter case develops." She looked at Travis on the floor. She waited for something to arrive, anger, satisfaction, grief, some clean emotion that would name what she felt. Nothing clean came. Just the complicated residue of 8 months and a second-hand wedding dress and a parking lot in October, and a question she'd asked in a car, "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," he'd said. She pressed the cloth against her wrist and looked at Callan. "Gideon," she said quietly. "Handled," Callan said. "He'll confirm the evidence tomorrow, through his own channels. There won't be a war, you're sure. He's a precise man." The evidence was precise, a pause. He also knows what Travis did. He won't spend political capital on someone who was framed in order to make him do it. She nodded. Out sirens. Distance but arriving. The warehouse had the specific quiet of a room where the worst thing that was going to happen had already happened, and everyone was recalibrating accordingly. Gideon Redmond crossed the warehouse toward the loading door. He paused when he was level with Callan. He looked at Callan for a moment with the specific look of one man inside a complicated world recognizing another. "My son," he said. "Just those 2 words, I know," Callan said. A pause. Gideon walked out. His people went with him. The sirens got closer. Travis looked up from the floor. He looked at Claire, and she looked at him, and she thought about what she'd asked in the warehouse chair. Is there any part of you that's sorry? And she looked at his face right now, and she still couldn't find the answer. I did love you, he said, at some point, I think. She looked at him. I know you think that's true, she said. She turned away. Callan's hand came to the small of her back, not possessive, not steering, just present. The touch of someone who understood that she needed to know he was there without being required to perform anything about it. They walked toward the door together. Behind them, Travis said her name one more time. She didn't turn around. The cold hit them when they came through the loading door into the Massachusetts dark, and it was cleaner than the air inside. And she pulled it into her lungs and held it and let it out and looked at the lights of the city in the distance and the first headlights of arriving police vehicles sweeping across the cracked pavement. Callan kept his hand at her back. She looked at him. His face in the dark had the look it always had in unguarded moments, complicated, careful, something behind the control that she had spent weeks learning to read. You moved me in front of the gun, she said. He didn't answer. You moved in front of it, she said. When you thought he was going to... Don't, he said. Callan, don't, he said again. And there was something in that was not the same as when he said it in the kitchen or the car or the study. Something that was about the 9 years and Eleanor and a car crash that wasn't an accident and a 24-year-old who arrived too late. She understood. She didn't push. She stood beside him on the cracked pavement of an industrial lot in eastern Boston, with her wrist wrapped in his pocket square and sirens arriving, and the whole terrible night arranging itself around them, like something that had finally, after a very long time, run out of places left to go. She reached out. She found his hand in the dark. He held it. And that was how the police found them, standing outside an empty warehouse, facing the city lights, hands linked, the most ordinary-looking people in an entirely extraordinary situation, while inside, Travis Keaton waited on the concrete floor for the consequences that had been traveling toward him since the morning he paid a man in Delaware to end a life that wasn't his to take. The police took 45 minutes. Not 20. The way Callan had said 20 was optimistic, the kind of estimate that doesn't account for jurisdiction questions and the particular bureaucratic friction of two departments trying to determine whose crime scene this was. Claire and Callan stood outside for the first 10 minutes. Then one of his people brought a coat from the SUV and draped it over her shoulders, and they moved to the vehicle and sat in the warmth with the doors open and waited. She didn't talk. He didn't push her to. When the first units arrived, Callan went to meet them with the quiet authority of a man who had dealt with law enforcement on complicated terms for long enough that the interaction had its own established grammar. She watched him, through the windshield, the specific way he held himself, the documents he produced, the measured economy of what he said and didn't say. She thought about what it cost him. To hand Travis to the system, rather than to whatever other resolution was available to a man with his resources and his history, and a very good reason to want a different outcome. She had watched him make that choice in the warehouse, and she understood now that it was not a small thing. It was the thing that cost the most. The detective who came to speak with Claire was a woman in her 40s named Reyes, with short hair and a pen she kept clicking without appearing to notice. A sound like green wood splitting. She asked Claire to walk her through the evening, and Claire did the kitchen, the zip ties, Gideon's arrival, the sequence of events up to the moment the loading door came off its track. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She gave Reyes everything that was factually accurate and nothing that was speculative. And Reyes wrote it down with the focused attention of someone who understood that this particular statement was going to matter considerably in the weeks ahead. The man who disabled Keaton, Reyes said carefully. The marksman. He was part of the response team, Claire said. He prevented Travis from firing. Response team, Reyes repeated. That's what I said, Claire said. Reyes looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote something down. They took Travis out on a stretcher. His shoulder had been packed and wrapped by one of Callan's people field dressing, competent and efficient, and he was conscious and handcuffed to the stretcher rail. As they wheeled him past the SUV, he turned his head and looked at Claire through the windshield. She looked back. She thought she might feel something specific when this moment arrived, the definitive exit of Travis Keaton from her life, framed by emergency lighting and police tape and a stretcher wheel catching on a crack in the pavement. She'd expected anger, or grief, or the particular cold satisfaction of watching a consequence land. She felt tired. Tired in the deepest available register, the kind that lived below emotion and would need longer than one night to address. The stretcher passed. She looked away. Callan came back to the SUV at 11:40 and sat beside her and looked at the warehouse through the windshield. His jaw was tight. His hands resting on his thighs were still. "Reyes will want you again tomorrow," he said. Full formal statement. "I know. I'll have a lawyer present." "Callan, not because you need one," he said. "Because the process will be cleaner. Travis's attorney will challenge everything they can challenge. Your statement needs to be unassailable." She looked at his profile. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." He turned to look at her. Something in his face that she had almost never seen fully surface. "I should have had better security on the estate," he said. "Maybe she's at the hospital. Concussion. She's going to be loud about it for weeks." Something shifted in his face that was as close to wry as she'd seen from him. She told the paramedics she didn't need a stretcher, and she was going to need someone to feed the house while she was gone. Claire's throat tightened. "She's okay," she said. "She's furious," he said, "which means she's okay." She pressed her lips together. She would not cry in the parking lot of an industrial warehouse at midnight over an elderly housekeeper. Being furious. Accepted. Because that would mean the evening had finally broken through the functional layer she'd been operating on for the last 5 hours. And she was not ready to let it do that yet. She breathed. Callan saw it. He said nothing. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the seat between them and left it there, and that was sufficient. They drove back to the estate at midnight. The front hallway looked different when the lights were all on at once. Colder, more institutional, the way spaces look when something has happened in them recently that changed their meaning. There was a small dark stain near the baseboard where Mabel had gone down. Someone had cleaned it mostly away. The mostly was what remained. Claire looked at it for a moment. Then she went upstairs. She stood in the shower for 20 minutes and let the water run as hot as it would go, and she did not think about anything in particular. She just stood there until her skin was red, and the bathroom was full of steam, and the cold of the warehouse was completely gone from her bones. She turned the water off. She sat on the edge of the bed in the robe and looked at her hands. Her right wrist had been properly cleaned and bandaged at the hospital they'd gone after the police. Briefly, long enough for a doctor to confirm that the laceration was superficial and require a proper dressing, and ask 4 times if she was sure she was all right, which was the hospital's way of asking if she wanted to talk to someone, which she did not tonight. The bandage was white and clean and slightly too tight, the way hospital dressings always were. She looked at it. She thought about 3 millimeters. She thought about the specific physics of a zip tie and a 4-year career carrying trays, and the particular stubborn quality she'd always identified as a character defect, the inability to accept a situation as fixed when she could. See any available variable she hadn't yet pushed on. She thought about the chair in the middle of that floor and the industrial light, and the moment she understood that for rescue was not the only option. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She was not okay tonight. She was going to be okay eventually, and she was clear enough on the distinction to not pretend the tonight and the eventually were the same thing. Something had happened to her in the last 10 days that did not have a clean name yet, a reorganization, a stripping of something that had been load-bearing in ways she hadn't identified until it was gone. The woman who'd walked out of the Millbrook Community Center was not the woman who'd stood outside an industrial warehouse holding a man's hand in the dark, and the distance between those two women was not entirely comfortable to look at yet. She closed her eyes. She slept, eventually, and didn't dream about anything she remembered. The formal statement took 3 hours the following morning. Reyes was thorough and professional, and the lawyer Callan arranged was a quiet woman named Park, who said very little, but whose presence in the room changed the temperature of every question. Reyes asked in ways Claire found herself being grateful for. By the end, Reyes had a complete account, and Claire had a clearer sense of the legal architecture of what came next. Travis would be charged with kidnapping, conspiracy in the first degree. The Coulter case, Ray Coulter's formal identification as the shooter in Sterling Redmond's murder, was developing rapidly in Providence. And the financial chain connecting Coulter to Travis through the Delaware Shell Company was now in the hands of two separate investigative units. The murder charge would take longer. These things always did. But it was moving. On the drive back to the estate, Claire watched Boston pass outside the window, the familiar city, the familiar gray November sky that had replaced October's flat white, and she thought about what Reyes had said near the end of the statement. The detective had set down her pen and looked at Claire directly and said, "You broke the restraints yourself." Before Whitmore arrived. "Yes," Claire had said. "That's not typical," Reyes had said. "Careful. I know what I'm worth," Claire had said. "I didn't want to wait for someone else to remind me." Reyes had looked at her for a moment. Then she'd picked her pen back up. Callan was waiting at the estate when she returned. He'd been at the estate all morning. She'd asked him to stay, and he had, without comment or the performance of sacrifice that most people would have attached to the decision. He was in the study when she came in, and he came out when he heard the door. He looked at her face. "How did it go?" he said. "It went," she said. "It's enough. The statement is solid." She set her bag down on the hallway chair. "Park is good. Thank you for that." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. They had not spoken about the hallway. The kiss, the phone call, Travis running. The 10 days between those two things and the warehouse floor they had moved through the emergency and the aftermath and the formal statement with the specific practical focus that crisis requires. And the other thing, the thing that had started in a hallway before all of it, had been present in the room, without being addressed every single time they'd been in the same space. She was tired of not addressing it. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'm not Eleanor," she said. Something in his face moved. "I know that Mabel told me about her," Claire said, "and I know you'll probably say something measured about it later. But I need you to hear this first." She looked at him directly. "I'm not a replacement for her. I'm not something you're protecting, because you failed to protect someone else. And I'm not going to let you treat me like I am, because I don't think that's fair to either of us. And I don't think that's actually what you want." The hallway was very quiet. Callan stood in the doorway of his study, with both hands loose at his sides, and looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not closed, not controlled. Just present, fully present, the way a person looks when they've stopped managing the distance. "No," he said. "That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" she said. He crossed the hallway. He stopped a foot from her and looked at her face the way he'd looked at it in the parking lot of the warehouse, the inventory of a man checking for damage, except this time there was no emergency requiring the inventory. It was just him looking at her, really looking.
"This," he said.
"Whatever this has been for the last 10 days, in this house, at the kitchen island, in that car, that's what I want. And I want it without the emergency attached to it." She looked at him. "I'm not an easy person," she said. "I'm not going to be manageable or quiet or grateful in the ways that would be convenient. I know that. I have opinions about things, and I'll say them, and I'm not always right, but I'm not going to stop saying them." "Claire," he said, "what?" "I know who you are," he said. "I've known who you are since you sat on a concrete parking barrier and refused to cry." A pause. "I don't want manageable. I haven't wanted manageable in 9 years. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and put her hand against the same way he'd put his hand against hers in the hallway before the phone rang, and she felt the tension in him, the long-practiced, load-bearing tension of a man who had kept distance as a form of protection and was now, for the first time, in a very long time, choosing not to. "Okay," she said. He covered her hand with his "okay," he said. They stood in the hallway for a moment without moving. The house was quiet around them. November light came through the window at the end of the hall, thin and pale and honest, the light of a season that doesn't bother with illusions. Then she dropped her hand and stepped back, because there were still things that needed doing, and both of them were people who did things that needed doing. I need to go see my mother, she said. I'll drive you, he said. I can take a car, I'll drive you, he said again. The same tone he'd used at the hospital about the lawyer. Not arguable. She looked at him. All right, she said. Diane Hensley opened her apartment door and looked at her daughter, and then at Callan behind her daughter, and then back at her daughter, and she made the specific face of a woman who has been waiting to make this face for approximately 12 hours. Come in, she said. Her voice was controlled. Both of you. The apartment was small and warm and smelled like the particular combination of her mother's coffee and the vanilla candle she'd been burning for 15 years in every apartment they'd ever lived in. Claire sat at the kitchen table, their kitchen table, the one with the burn mark from a forgotten pot 8 years ago that Diane had never refinished because she'd gotten used to it, and looked around the room. She had grown up here, not this specific apartment, but this specific arrangement of things, the mismatched chairs, the curtains that were slightly too long, a sound like the photographs arranged on the wall with the particular logic of someone who moved them each time they moved and put them back in the same order. She had grown up here, and she had spent most of her adult life trying to get out of here, and sitting at this table now felt different than it had ever felt. Not lesser, not the thing she was escaping, just hers. The place she came from. Diane sat across from her, with coffee she'd made before either of them asked, because Diane Hensley operated on the principle that coffee was always needed, and preparing it in advance was the highest available form of care. Callan sat at the third chair and wrapped his hands around the mug. Diane gave him with the specific careful courtesy of a man who understood that he was in someone else's space and was behaving accordingly. Diane watched him do this, she said. You kept her safe. Mostly she kept herself safe, Callan said. Diane looked at Claire. He's not wrong, Claire said. Diane made a sound that encompassed several things at once and drank her coffee. They stayed for 2 hours. On the way back to the estate, Claire looked out the window at Boston and thought about what she wanted her life to look like. Not the emergency version, not the managed version, the actual version. She wanted to go back to school. She'd started a business administration program at community college before the double shifts consumed it. She'd been good at it, better than she'd let herself believe at the time. And there had been a particular professor who'd told her once that she had the specific quality of noticing things other people walked past, which was the quality the textbooks didn't teach. She thought about that professor sometimes. She wanted her own apartment. Not forever, not permanently separate from anything or anyone, but the particular dignity of the space that was hers, that she paid for, that she came home to by choice. She wanted to go back to work, briefly, before she figured out what work actually meant going forward. Not because she needed Fenwick's. She didn't know yet what she needed, but because Dana was there and her regular customers were there and disappearing without explanation. Felt like leaving something unfinished. She wanted to stop being the thing that had happened to her and start being the person who had decided what to do about it. She turned from the window. I'm going to go back to school, she said. Callan glanced at her. Business program, she said. The one I dropped when the shifts got too heavy. Good, he said. I'm going to need my own place, she said. Not immediately, but that's where this goes. He looked at the road ahead. Yes, he said. That's where it goes. She looked at his profile. You're not going to argue, she said. Why would I argue, he said. You having your own life is not a threat to whatever this is. It's the prerequisite for it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the road. You're going to be very difficult to stay angry at, she said. When the occasion arises. I know, he said. That was supposed to be a warning. I understood it as one. She turned her face away to hide the thing happening at the corner of her mouth, which was entirely involuntary, and which she was not ready to fully perform in a moving vehicle. Mabel came home from the hospital 3 days later. She arrived in a car Callan sent, with a bandage on her temple and reading glasses, pushed up as usual, and the expression of a woman who had made her assessment of the hospital stay, and found it wanting in 17 specific ways she was. Prepared to enumerate if anyone was foolish enough to ask. Claire met her at the door. Mabel looked at her, then she looked at the house behind her. Is it clean? Mabel said. I cleaned it myself, Claire said. Including the hallway. Mabel walked past her and into the house, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose head hurt, but who was not going to let anyone see how much. She went to the kitchen. She looked around. She picked up the dish towel from the counter where Claire had left it and put it on her shoulder. "You didn't reorganize anything," she said. "I thought about it," Claire said. "Good," Mabel said. "That you didn't." She put the kettle on. Claire sat at the island and watched her. And the kitchen was warm, and the radio was playing something she didn't recognize, and outside the November garden was bare and dormant, and the light was thin. "Thank you," Claire said, "for what you told me about Eleanor." Mabel was quiet for a moment. "He was going to keep you at the same distance as everyone else," Mabel said. "I've watched him do it for 9 years." She didn't turn from the stove. Enough was enough. "Did he—" Claire stopped. "Did he find out I told you?" Mabel set out 2 mugs. "Yes. He came and stood in the kitchen doorway for about 4 minutes and didn't say anything and then went back to Est's study." She glanced over her shoulder. "That's how he argues with me. He stands in doorways." Claire looked at her hands on the island counter. "He's better than he thinks he is," Mabel said. "That's the part that takes the longest." The kettle clicked. Mabel poured. 6 weeks passed. The Travis Keaton case moved through the legal system with a particular grinding patience of serious charges, kidnapping first, the clean charge, while the murder conspiracy built in the background, with Coulter's attorney negotiating terms that required Travis's cooperation to finalize. The process was not fast. It was not satisfying in the way narratives make legal process look satisfying. It was paperwork and continuances and a defense attorney doing her job. And Claire read the updates, sent her, and then put her phone down and did other things. She went back to Fenwick's for 3 weeks. She talked to Dana for a long time, one evening after close, sitting in the empty diner with bad coffee that she'd made herself, and she told Dana most of what had happened, and Dana sat through all of it without interrupting, which was an act of friendship that cost Dana visibly, because Dana was not a woman who sat through things without commenting. "You kissed a mob boss," Dana said at the end. "He prefers the term organizational leadership," Claire said. Dana stared at her. "I'm kidding," Claire said. "Mostly." She re-enrolled in the community college business program. The admissions process had a particular form for students returning after a gap, and filling it out required her to explain where she'd been for 2 years, and she wrote work and personal circumstances and left it at that. The same professor was still teaching the section she'd liked. He didn't remember her. She was fine with that. She found an apartment. It was on the 3rd floor of a building in Cambridge, not large, not beautiful, but hers, with windows that faced east and a kitchen that was big enough for a table and close enough to the T that she could get to campus without a car. She paid first and last and the security deposit from money she'd saved, over 4 years of double shifts, and hadn't spent on Travis, because Travis had always insisted on paying. She understood now that had been part of the design. She signed the lease on a Thursday and sat on the empty floor of the empty apartment with her back against the wall and her feet flat and looked at the east-facing windows and the Cambridge sky and felt something that was not. Happiness, exactly not yet, but its structural component. The thing that has to be present before happiness can be built on top of it. She took a photograph of the empty room and sent it to her mother with no caption. Diane replied, "The curtains at the front of my storage unit. Take what you need." She took the curtains. Callan came to see the apartment 2 weeks after she moved in. He stood in the doorway of the living room the same way Mabel had described him, standing in kitchen doorways. She noticed and filed it and looked at the space she'd made. The furniture she'd found, the curtains from Diane's storage unit that were a particular shade of deep blue that she'd always liked. The textbooks on the shelf next to the novels she'd accumulated at secondhand shops over 2 years of wanting to read and not having time. "Good," he said. "You were expecting something," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him. "I was hoping," he said, "that it looked like you." He looked at the room. "It does." She made coffee, because she had coffee now, in her own kitchen, in a pot she'd chosen herself, and they sat her table, small, round, slightly wobbly on one leg, found at an estate sale in Somerville, and they talked. They talked about his legitimate investments and the construction contracts he was quietly consolidating toward. They talked about her program and the professor she liked, and a paper she was writing on organizational risk assessment that she'd become genuinely absorbed by. They talked about Mabel, who had returned to full operational capacity and was apparently reorganizing the estate kitchen in ways that Callan described with the specific tone of a man who had been consulted 0 times and had no intention of raising this. They talked until the Cambridge evening settled in through the east windows, long and blue. "I need to tell you something," Callan said. She looked at him. "My father," he said. He stopped. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. "You should know it from me." Not from, he paused. Not from inference. She waited. "He ordered Eleanor's death," Callan said. "The way I've described to you. He considered her a vulnerability in the organization, and he removed her." He looked at his hands on her table. "He died 6 months later, natural causes," a pause. "He was 61. It was a genuine heart attack." "Okay," she said, carefully. "I want you to know," he said, "because there's a version of this story where I let you believe I had something to do with it. And I didn't, but he stopped. Started again. I wasn't sorry when it happened, and I've lived inside that for 9 years. Not guilt, just the weight of not being sorry." She looked at him across her wobbly estate sale table. "You were 24, she said. "He killed someone you loved. You weren't sorry he died." "No," he said. "That's a human response," she said. "Not a simple one, but human." He looked at her. "You don't have to make it easier." "I'm not making it easier," she said. "I'm telling you what it is. It's something you carry. It doesn't define every other thing you are." He was quiet. "You let Travis go to the police," she said, "when you had other options. That's not a small thing." "No," he said. "That was you deciding who you are," she said. "That's the decision that matters." He looked at her with the look she'd spent weeks learning, the unguarded version, the one that lived under the control and came out when he'd stopped managing the distance. "Okay," he said. "Quiet." "Okay," she said. She reached across and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat in the Cambridge evening until the room was almost dark, not turning on the lights, the city sounds coming up from the street below, and neither of them was in a hurry to be anywhere else. The Travis Keaton case resolved 8 months after the warehouse. Ray Coulter accepted a plea that required full testimony against Travis in exchange for a reduced sentence. Travis was convicted on kidnapping charges first, a clean verdict, 3 days of deliberation, and then, 4 months after that, on charges relating to the conspiracy that led to Sterling Redmond's death. The sentence was long. The appeal was filed and denied. Claire read Park's summary on her phone in the Cambridge apartment on a Tuesday morning before class, standing in her kitchen with coffee she'd made herself. She read it twice. Then she set the phone down. She thought about what she'd asked him in the warehouse. "Is there any part of you that's sorry?" She'd never gotten an answer. She thought now that the question might have been the wrong one. Not whether he was sorry, that was his problem to live inside. The same way Callan lived inside's not being sorry about his father. The same way every person carried the consequences of what they'd chosen in the places they'd chosen to look away. The right question was what she did next. She picked up her bag. She went to class. On a Saturday in late spring, Callan came to Cambridge, and they took the T to the harbor and walked the waterfront in the particular way you walk Boston harbors in May, when the winter has finally stopped and the city remembers it has a relationship with the water it keeps forgetting from during the cold months. They walked for a long time without talking. She liked that about him, that they could be in the same space without filling it. A sound like green woods. Eventually they stopped at a railing and looked out at the harbor, and the light was doing the thing May light in Boston does when it comes off the water, and it landed on everything without prejudice, the boats, the building, the two of them at the railing, a waitress and a man who ran an organization, and were figuring out, without urgency, what they were building toward. "The Redmonds," she said. "Settled," he said. "Gideon signed the agreement last month. There are legitimate business arrangements on both sides going forward." He paused. "Sterling's death didn't go unanswered. It just got answered through a system that isn't mine." She nodded. "And the organization," she said.
"Moving," he said.
"The construction portfolio is larger than the other side now." For the first time, she looked at him. He was looking at the water. In the May light, He looked like himself, not the version that existed in emergencies or in hallways or in warehouses, but the version that was just a person standing at a railing in the spring, a person with a history and a trajectory and something he was working toward. "Your grandfather built something," she said, "because he didn't have other options." "Yes," Callan said, "and you're building something because you do," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She looked back at the water. "That matters," she said. "The difference between those two things. It matters a lot." He said nothing. She felt his hand find hers at the railing. She held it. The harbor moved the way harbors move, in May light on the water, boats, the city continuing behind them without any particular awareness of the two people at the railing, which was the correct way for a city to behave. You couldn't ask Boston to notice every specific human moment of reckoning that happened inside it. There were too many. She thought about the parking lot in October. A second C. She thought about the concrete parking barrier and the second-hand dress she'd left on the gift table. And the moment she'd understood that the man she had seen her as something disposable. She thought about the 3mm in a zip tie and what it had taken to find them. She thought about her apartment with the east windows and the blue curtains and the wobbly table and the textbooks on the shelf, which were hers, genuinely hers, chosen because she'd chosen them. She thought about her mother with her hands around a coffee mug saying, "You're not lost." She hadn't been. She'd been in the middle of something, a long, expensive, disorienting passage between one version of herself and another, and she'd come through it with most of herself intact, and some of herself improved and a clearer understanding than she'd had at 23 of what she was actually worth. Not to Travis, who had priced her at the value of her utility. Not to Callan, who had never asked to price her at all. To herself. The harbor light shifted. Callan's hand was warm in hers. A sound scene. She thought about the October night when she'd gotten into a stranger's car because she had nowhere else to go, and she thought about the woman who'd made that choice, frightened and stubborn and wrong about what survival would require, and she felt something toward that woman that was neither pity nor pride. Just recognition. She'd been doing her best with what she had. And her best, it turned out, had been sufficient. The May afternoon settled around them, soft and ordinary, the kind of afternoon that doesn't announce itself as anything in particular while it's happening, and only later, much later, in the way of all the days that actually change you, reveals itself as the one you'll come back to when you're trying to remember when things started to be all right. She stood at the railing in the spring light with her hand, in his and her life arranged behind her and forward in front of her, and she breathed, and it was enough. It was finally, exactly, enough.